Street Fighting Years, an autobiography of the 60s by Tariq Ali. There are no shortages of memoirs concerning the 1960s, but it would be hard to find one that covers more ground than Tariq Ali's. Because of the diverse people Ali encounters and the many different locations he travels to, it is difficult to summarize the book. Ali begins his story growing up in Pakistan, and then later becomes involved in the emerging Pakistani student movement. The Pakistan regime's brutal crackdown on the students causes his parents to fear for his safety and send him off to Britain to continue his education. In Britain, Ali becomes one of the leading figures in the New Left. He eventually travels to Paris, Berlin, Vietnam, Bolivia, and back to Pakistan. Ali met Malcolm X in Oxford, and apparently spent one evening talking late into the night with him about politics and religion. Ali debated Harvard Don Henry Kissinger as part of the televised Oxford-Harvard Vietnam War debates. He was recruited and worked with Bertrand Russell on a Vietnam War crimes tribunal. He was also sent by Russell on a mission to Bolivia to make sure the recently captured Regis Debray was still alive and to send words of hope to Debray. He marched in Berlin with the German STS and advised Rudi Dutschke on strategy. He appeared on TV with Daniel Cohn-Bendit and claims he advised Cohn-Bendit on how to deal with the BBC. He claims that he talked politics often with John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and even claims to be the inspiration for John Lennon's song, Power to the People. He talked about the Vietnam War one night with Ulrich Meinhof. The various people who pop up in this book represent a who's who of the 1960s. And to a certain extent, this might represent the book's greatest flaw. At one point in the book, since the BBC had banned the song Street Fighting Man, Ali rings up Mick Jagger to ask for the lyrics to publish in his magazine, The Black Dwarf. He receives a handwritten copy of the song the same day. But after photocopying it, he throws the original in the wastebasket. He justifies it this way, quote, "No one in the office thought this was sacrilegious. The cult of the individual is always, in the last resort, a substitute of collective action. Jagger sang well, and he was helpful. That was all." And yet, by all the name-dropping Ali does in his book, one gets the sense at times that he has been thoroughly seduced by the cult of celebrity. Although, I suppose, if I had met all the same people, I would want to write about it in my book as well. And there are advantages to Ali's approach. He paints a very vivid picture of Rudi Dutschke. And reading his book, one gets a very good picture of the anger and despair felt by the New Left after someone attempted to assassinate Dutschke. And although Ali never actually meets Che Guevara, the section of the book dealing with his adventures in Bolivia and Regis Debray give a sense of the importance Che Guevara had to the period, and the shock felt at Che's death, something which is lost nowadays with the over-commercialization of Che Guevara's image. It's forgotten kind of how shocking his death was to people at the time. Although it is hard to summarize the plot of the book, several themes can become evident. The failure of state communism is a major theme. Both the failure of the USSR and China to help Vietnam, and the betrayal of May 1968 by the French Communist Party. Also, the failure of liberal democracy during the Vietnam War and the Vietnam War itself are major themes. Although the book was originally published in 1987, the new edition contains a 50-page introduction that helps to highlight some of the parallels to the present. History rarely repeats itself, Alley says in the introduction, but it echoes. Many of these echoes are self-evident, even without the aid of the new introduction, such as the crisis facing the anti-war left in Britain as to whether or not to support the pro-war Labour government. Tariq Ali and his friends support the anti-war candidacy of independent Richard Gott, only to be demonized by others on the left out of fear of a Tory victory. Unfortunately, the candidacy of Richard Gott ultimately ends in failure, and Tariq Ali is unable to provide an easy answer to the problem of the failure of liberal bourgeois democracy to provide an anti-war alternative. It is a problem that still faces activists today on both sides of the Atlantic. To collect evidence for Bertrand Russell's Vietnam War Crimes Tribunal, Tariq Ali travels to Cambodia and Vietnam, and he devotes a large part of the book to describing the human cost of the war. It is heartbreaking reading for any American. He describes how schools and hospitals were bombed and the heavy civilian casualties on the Vietnamese side. Tariq Ali concludes correctly that the Vietnam War was genocide. And he quotes from Jean-Paul Sartre at the War Crimes Tribunal. Quote, "The present genocide, the end result of the unequal development of societies, is total war waged to the limit by one side without the slightest reciprocity. Indeed, genocide presents itself as the only possible reaction to the rising of a whole people against its oppressors." End quote. Parallels are highlighted in the new introduction when Tariq Ali focuses on the civilian costs of the Iraq War, citing a study that indicates the Iraqi death toll since the March 2003 invasion might be as high as 100,000. Ali continues, "When the World Health Organization claimed that the sanctions against Iraq had cost the lives of at least 500,000 children, the then U.S. Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, told CBS that it was a price worth paying. No doubt, the debased politicians and even more debased apologists in the media think the same of the 100,000 killed in 2003 to 2004. Nice of them to be so generous with Iraqi lives." End quote.